Hello and welcome to episode 74 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Today's show is hitting the internet on June 30th, which happens to be my birthday. As I'm sure you all know by now, I am currently in Ireland for my 620-mile pilgrimage on the Ireland Way to raise money and awareness in the fight against domestic violence. In honor of my birthday, please consider donating to CASA of Pinellas County, Florida by going to casapinellas.org/walkwithrick/ that's casapinellas.org/walkwithrick/. I turn 42 today, which also happens to be the age when my abusive father died. I want to ask that somebody do me the honor of donating $42 today. If you can't donate $42, I completely understand. $25, $15, even $10, whatever amount you donate, every dollar will go to CASA so that they can continue to help victims of domestic violence become survivors of domestic violence. Also, please share this podcast and the link on social media. On today's episode, I will be talking to Dermot Breen, who actually completed the Ireland Way in honor of his late wife. I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation. Thank you for joining me, Dermot.
You're very welcome, Rick. Thanks for the invite.
So the first thing we're going to discuss today is you took a pilgrimage on the Ireland Way, and I want to talk about this. Somebody else who has already accomplished what I'm going to be trying to accomplish. So why don't you tell me about your experiences on the Ireland Way, and then we'll talk about your book about those experiences.
Okay, yeah. Well, I actually walked the Ireland Way back in the summer of 2018. So that's 4 years ago, before COVID and all that hit us, knocked us off for 2 years at least. The reason I actually did that walk was it was the third long distance walk I'd completed in memory of my wife, who I lost to cancer, ovarian cancer, back in 2015. And I'd completed a couple of long distance walks, one in the north of Ireland and one in Spain, the Camino de Santiago. That was 2015 and 2016, respectively. And then I'd sort of, I thought I'd finished with the long distance hikes and the fundraising, and I'd sort of tried to move on from that. But then I got wind of this new route that had been developed in Ireland called the Ireland Way. And what really piqued my interest was the fact that the route ran from the extreme southwest of Ireland, down in County Cork, a place called Castletownbere. But important for me, it finished in the extreme northeast of Ireland in a place called Ballycastle. And Ballycastle was my wife's hometown, my late wife's hometown, where she was raised and grew up. And we had spent a lot of time up around the north coast, and I knew Ballycastle well. Of course, she still had family there. And that's where her remains rested, actually, in the town of Ballycastle. And so that sort of hooked me right in. And I thought, okay, I really need to do this walk. And so that was the real driving force behind it. And again, I decided to do this walk in memory of my wife, and also to raise funds for Cancer Research UK. So I say that was really what motivated me to go onto the walk. And from that point to the time when I actually set off, it was only about 3 weeks. So I felt compelled to do it and didn't want to hang about. So just grabbed it with both hands and just went for it. I did a bit of research, obviously, and got the maps and got the guidebook. There's a very useful guidebook now in its second edition, which gives the maps and all the points of interest and where to stop, etc., etc. As Caroline Allen has actually produced that and can be found on her website at theirelandway.ie. So as I said, done all the research, and then just basically set off from home. I took public transport all the way down I was living in Belfast at that time. So I took public transport down to Dublin, I went down to Cork, and then I got a bus over to Castletown Bear, which is where the route starts, and arrived in Castletown Bear on a beautiful summer's day, actually, in um, June. And but little did I know at that time. I said it was a beautiful day, sun was shining. I thought, oh, how lucky am I? But unknown to me at that time, it was actually the beginning of a heat wave that had arrived in Ireland and lasted for about a month. And we Irish here are not really used to that sort of weather. We're more used to the summer rain, but it was absolutely baking. So the first few weeks of my walk was completed in a very intense heat, and it was quite a challenge in itself, just coping with those conditions. Especially in the early days where you're going over the Cork Mountains, so there's quite a bit of uphills to be tackled there, and yeah, so hot and sweaty work really would sort of sum up the first few weeks of it. So, but it did go extremely well, and I suppose if I had to use one word really to sort of describe the best thing about the Ireland Way, it would be hospitality. Probably most people know that Irish are sort of famed for their hospitality, but I really found that it went into overdrive when I was doing this walk. Probably because I was walking on my own and the fact that I was doing it for charity as well. So, I mean, the hospitality I received on the walk from all the places I went through was just absolutely incredible. It's a wonder I got the walk completed because I was invited in for tea so many times along the way. If I'd stopped every time I was asked, I'd still be on it probably.
It's funny you should mention that because when some of my friends have asked me why I wanted to do this particular walk as my first walk and why I didn't just want to go to Ireland and visit the main tourist spots, one of the things that I said was doing something like the Ireland Way. You take a definitive path,
Mm-hmm.
but it puts you somewhere that you wouldn't have gone normally. It puts you through so many small towns that you would skip
Absolutely.
if you would just use the regular Ireland guidebook that you would get at Barnes and Noble or something like that. I did pick up the guidebook from Carolyn Allen, and she is actually the person who suggested that I have you on the show. So I do want to thank her for that as well. So you said that it was extremely hot when you started it, and it appears, at least from my research, because I've been doing the research on this, that the first few days are the hardest on this particular walk because of the elevation, because
Yeah.
you're in a lot more rural of an area than you will be sometimes later in the hike. Did you find that to be the case?
Yes, absolutely concur with that. It starts off quite hard. You're in at the deep end, shall we say, in terms of ascents and the challenge of the route itself. And that's if you choose to do it in I suppose, what might be the traditional way. And as described in Caroline Allen's book, it's sort of you start in the south and go north. I know other people have done it in reverse, and they've obviously then started in Ballycastle and worked their way down through Ireland. But I would recommend going the traditional route, as it were, from south to north. But that certainly the first 3 or 4 days you're up in the hills of the Cork Mountains. It's a range called the Cahill Mountains. They're not terribly high in terms of the highest peaks in Ireland, like Carntool and places like that there, but they're still challenging and there's quite a bit of elevation involved. And so you're up and down quite a bit over those first 3 or 4 days. I'd done quite a bit of hill walking prior to that, so I was quite used to the mountains, but it was very challenging for me because of the heat and because you were out in that exposed heat for such long periods of time. So you just had to be prepared for that, and make sure that you had something to cover your head, obviously, so that you weren't getting roasted from above, and you had plenty of water with you. Because again, as you say, certainly those early stages where you're going over the mountains, you're not going to find any cafes or pubs or anything to call into for refreshments or for a rest. So you need to be prepared for that sort of that type of isolated trekking. At the start and the end of each day, you're leaving and you're coming into civilized areas, towns and villages, and you can obviously stock up then and find somewhere to stay, etc. So yeah, it's certainly I would say the first few days are certainly the most challenging if you're going from south to north.
And it's funny that you should mention going from south to north because when I was looking into originally mapping out how I was going to do this with where I was going to stay at the beginning, how I was going to get to different locations, I had tossed around the idea of going north to south, but then everybody
Mm-hmm.
said it's going to be during the rain season and the rain will be at your back if you're going south to north and it'll be going right into your face if you go north to south. So that helped me clinch my decision. And then like you said,
Yeah,
I would rather take on the mountains at the beginning when my legs are still feeling strong, when I'm still feeling at my best,
yeah, mm-hmm.
and then when I start getting tired, obviously, then you have
Yeah.
maybe an easier path. You get more chances to stop and things like that.
Uh,
So you wrote a book about your journey, and it is called Exiles. Why don't you talk about your book for a minute?
sure, yeah. It's I'd written books about the two previous long distance journeys I'd done, and so I sort of followed on, if you like, for this third long distance walk on the Ireland Way. Again, I write the books as part of the efforts to raise money for Cancer Research UK. So all the profits go towards that charity from all the books I've written. This one was perhaps the easiest, or what would you say, most pleasurable book, I suppose, to write because the journey was so interesting, and not just my journey. It was the fact that a large part of the Ireland Way, the whole southern part of the Ireland Way, actually follows a route that was taken by an Irish chieftain over 400 years ago. That's Donald Cam O'Sullivan Bear. And he was one of the last Irish chiefs that sort of held out against the English when they were trying to rule Ireland and prevent the Spanish armies invading from Ireland into England at the time of Queen Elizabeth. And this Donald Cam O'Sullivan Bear, this Irish chieftain, he had actually fled from Munster or the area of Cork and fled from there and along with 1,000 followers, he marched north to a place called Leitrim, which is pretty far north, just south of the Northern Irish border. And it was a grueling sort of 2-week march, 300 miles. They were doing it in the depths of winter in 1602, 1603. I'd read up about a bit about this march. There's little excerpts about it in Caroline Allen's guidebook as well. I done a lot more research and was just intrigued by the whole story of this Irish chieftain and his 1,000 followers doing this incredible march north. And say I was sort of following in his footsteps. And it was 400 years to the month since Donald Cam O'Sullivan's death, actually, when I did the walk. And it's an incredible story. And so I had it in my mind that in telling my story, I would want to weave in his story as well. Then that developed into this idea of, hey, why don't I? And I sort of felt this when I was doing the walk. It was almost like, you were stopping at particular spots that had significance in terms of the historical aspect of it and Donald Cam's story. And you almost felt like you had this guide walking alongside you. So I reinvented him as a sort of a ghost character to walk alongside me at various points on the walk and basically explain to me what was happening in his time and the various battles that he and his followers had to contend with and the various challenges and huge difficulties that they had to face and deal with in this long march that they undertook. That was incredibly interesting for me to sort of interweave his story and my story as we're going along. There was some really nice coincidence that sort of come along as well in terms of, it mentioned the dates and the significance of the 400-year anniversary. Then something I didn't know until I actually was well into the journey was that this Irish chieftain was actually exiled to Spain and became a Knight of the Order of Santiago. So he became one of these people that actually protected pilgrims while they were walking the Spanish route, the Camino de Santiago, which I'd walked 2 years prior. There was various little coincidences like that, or resonances like that really appealed to me. So I quite enjoyed playing around with his story and interweaving it with mine. I think it makes for a good read. So I've had a very positive feedback in relation to it. I must admit, I felt like it was a departure for me to sort of bring this very, very fictional element into the story and to create this ghost guide. So I sort of thought I was taking a real risk there, and how would it work and how would people receive it. But thankfully, it seems to have gone down very well, and people have loved the idea.
Coincidentally, you talk about El Camino in Spain, which
Yes.
was the first pilgrimage I planned on doing. I decided when I first heard about it and I first started doing research on El Camino that
Yeah.
I was going to do it for my 50th birthday. I was going to do it around my 50th birthday, and that was going to be a goal I set forth for myself. And then while doing research for that, I learned about the Ireland Way,
Mm-hmm.
and in my mind, I thought I should do the Ireland Way when I'm a little younger, when I'm in better shape, because El Camino has a lot more of a, not tourist aspect to it, but there are a lot more people doing it at any given time.
Absolutely.
It's a lot easier to find places to stay. So maybe when I'm
Yeah.
50, okay, maybe I can handle that one, but I want to do the harder one first. And that's
Yeah.
why I decided to pick doing the Ireland Way this year as opposed to in a few years. Now, you also had a particular purpose for doing this, much like I have a purpose for doing mine. You wanted to raise money and awareness for cancer research because of your wife. You ended in her hometown. That must have been incredibly meaningful for you, not just to do this walk, which is already very
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, very significant, all the history that's involved. But then when you put in this personal reason for you and you have this noble purpose to it, what were the emotions that brought up for you while you were finishing, especially, and you're starting to come towards her hometown?
Yeah. Yeah. It was, well, I suppose maybe it goes without saying, it was incredibly meaningful, and it was a very emotional homecoming in a way, returning to my late wife's hometown. And say she still has family in Ballycastle. Oh my, they and other and friends as well in Ballycastle. They pulled out all the stops to really welcome me in, and I had the most joyous reception that one could possibly imagine when I returned there. So yes, it was a real mix of emotions, really, in terms of, yeah, okay, there's this underlying sadness, obviously, that the main purpose behind the journey, and arriving into the town where my wife now rests, and then the sheer joy that I was met with in terms of what my friends and family had set up for me. And there was a lot of the shops and bars around the town had been raising money for me for my arrival. I was handed a big check when I arrived. There was actually, it so happened that it coincided, my arrival coincided with an ancient fair that's been running for hundreds of years in Ballycastle. It's called the Owl Lammas Fair. It was originally a horse fair, but over the years has widened out to attracting all sorts of, what would you say, crafts and fair type material. And there's for a whole weekend towards the last bank holiday of August, there's a huge carnival atmosphere in the town. So I arrived in the middle of this year as well. There was a dinner hosted by the town's mayor, and I was invited to it. There was a concert on in the Diamond, the main square in the town. I was invited onto the stage there to talk to the audience and get donations. We had a firework display that wasn't arranged for me, but it almost felt like it was put on for me. It was part of the fair itself. But a really nice thing that happened there was that I always had it in mind that when it got to Ballycastle, that was going to be the end of my long distance walking. and I was going to ceremoniously burn my boots. And my friends had organised like a pyre out on a group of rocks which jut out into the sea just at Ballycastle. They're called the Palms Rocks. And so they'd set up this a pyre, I suppose is the best way to describe it, on the rocks. And I went out there, and my boots were burned on the rocks. This fire then signalled back to the town, about half a mile away, that it was time to set off the fireworks. It didn't exactly work 100% to plan, but it was a lovely idea, and it did sort of work, and it was a fantastic finish to the whole occasion. So yeah, so real mixture of emotions. Although I would add that, say, this was the third long distance walk I'd done and the third book I'd written. And I think if anyone was to read the three books, which I've titled the Pilgrim Trilogy, they'll see a huge shift in my demeanor, my whole mental state, if you like, from the early days when I was literally just crushed and didn't know where to turn, and then decided to do this first long distance walk around Northern Ireland as a form of, I don't know, I needed to do something, escape, try and raise money, give myself some purpose in life, basically. And then through to the Camino in Spain, which was a more sort of a healing process. And then the third journey was almost like a coming home in terms of me just coming to terms with everything that had happened. I finish in a much, much better place than I begun when I set out on these long distance walks. The finale, if you like, of the Book of Exiles is really, I think, sort of tries to express that coming full circle. The title of the book, Exiles, actually it relates to a number of things, and one being that the Irish chieftain I referred to earlier was exiled to Spain and actually died in Spain, was murdered in Spain, actually. Again, another little coincidence there, which I'll just refer to as he was 57 years old when he was killed in Spain. I was 57 years old when I was doing the walk. So I say that's just three examples of lots of little resonances that sort of cropped up throughout the story.
You mentioned the term coming to terms with
Yeah,
everything that happened, and I think that that is something that I'm trying to take along with my journey. Obviously, we're coming from
yeah,
completely different situations. You lost your wife to cancer. I am doing this to raise money and awareness for domestic violence because I grew up in an abusive home. We're both sort of trying to come to terms with two very completely different types
yeah,
of tragedy, types of trauma, but trying to get out on the trail and trying to sort of lose yourself for a moment, put yourself through something that is
mm-hmm.
physically daunting, that will test your endurance, your ability to make it through something.
Yeah,
When that's what you were doing metaphorically through life for so long, do you
mm-hmm.
find that these walks, these journeys, are sort of a metaphor for what you had to go through as somebody trying to cope with the loss of your wife?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's I would say that the therapeutic aspect of walking cannot be underestimated, quite honestly. It's an incredible way of just giving yourself time mentally to work through issues from the past or whatever form they may be that are troubling you. It just gives you time to process them and to, as you say, come to terms with them in your own way. It's not easy. It's not a quick fix. There are no quick fixes to a lot of these mental issues, but it does. I think it's a very powerful way of doing it because when you're walking, and the Ireland Way is great for this because there are, and there will be for yourself, long periods of time when you are on your own. It's you and your demons, and you either run away from them or you tackle them and face them. And it just gives you time to work through those issues, time which you otherwise wouldn't have because there's so many distractions in life, and you just don't really get the opportunity to process them the way you need to. I found that probably for me, all three walks have certainly had that important aspect to it. The Camino's great for that actually because, in a way, there you can be alone or you can be with a lot of people. I mentioned hospitality being the key word in the Ireland way. For me, with the Camino, camaraderie was the key word because there are, as you alluded to earlier, there's so many people actually complete that trail. There are different trails you can go on. I did the Camino del Norte, which is a northern route, follows the coastline along the north coast of Spain. It's a bit quieter than the traditional French route, but even there, you have the opportunity to meet a lot of people, and everybody's going the same direction, as it were. So there's that commonality, there's that common bond. Very easy to strike up friendships, but at the same time, everybody respects your needs as a pilgrim. If you want to be alone, you can be alone. The Ireland way, as I say, it is, you're probably right to start, do it first while you're younger and fitter, because it is challenging. You spend a lot of time on your own. There is great hospitality at the start points and the end points of each day. You do occasionally bump into people on the route as well. It's not all over mountains and hills. You do go through little villages and towns as well. In terms of just having that time to think through things and process things, it's invaluable. And I would say as well, equally for me, the writing was extremely important because that, again, just it allows you that time to articulate your feelings and your emotions and put it down on paper and exercise those demons in whatever way you feel able to do it.
So you mentioned hospitality a number of times during this conversation, and obviously what happened as you were completing your journey was an incredible example of that hospitality. But where was a place that you stopped or that you spent either a few hours or maybe a day or two that you weren't expecting to find? Where was a hidden gem that you found
Oh.
along the route?
In one way, it's quite easy to answer that. Another way, it's difficult because there were so many hidden gems along the route, and there's countless examples I refer to in the book. Like right from the outset, there was just so many wonderful people. I remember a guy I met in a bar in a little place called Kikil. It was into about day 3, 4 of the walk, and I went in there for a bit of a break and to have a drink before setting up camp and sleeping for the night, which I didn't actually, as it turns out. But anyway, this guy and his girlfriend were in the pub, and he noticed my banner. I was carrying a banner saying the Ireland Way and walking for cancer research, and they noticed that, and they got chatting to me in the bar, and then found out that Andy Hall was the guy's name, and his girlfriend Louise. Andy's a singer-songwriter. I ended up out on the street. It sounds like we were worse for wear at this stage, but we were not. We just had a couple of drinks, all very sociable. And then he wanted to sing me a song. So we went out onto the street, onto the sidewalk, because he didn't want to disturb people in the bar. And he actually sung me this song out in, about 11 o'clock at night in the dark on the city street. Much, much later, then, when I had written my book, published the book, and launched it in Ballycastle, Andy actually came the whole way up, him and his girlfriend, from Kikil in County Cork, and he performed a song for me at the book launch as well, and I actually composed a special song for myself. That was very special. But the place that really comes to mind would be Tipperary for a number of reasons. I arrived into Tipperary town, or Tip Town as it's locally known, expecting to stay there maybe one night or two. I went to a little B&B run by Jerry and Dorothy. They were very hospitable and put me up for the night, and then I headed off the following morning. I actually arranged that I would perhaps return to them for a second night. The day I walked out of Tipperary and started heading north to a little place called White, I ran into a herd of bullocks unexpectedly in a field. That area around Tipperary, actually, I'll warn you, just avoid cattle if you can. It's not always easy to do, but give them as wide a berth as you can. I'll give you a few other tips if you want before you go in relation to cattle, if you do encounter them. But I wasn't used to really dealing with herds of cattle. And anyway, there was a herd of young bullocks that actually, I would describe it, stampeded at me at one stage, and luckily I was close to an electric fence and was able to duck in under that and get away. But in the process and in my rush and trying to get away, I actually twisted my right leg and ended up tearing a calf muscle. When I rolled over on the other side of the electric fence and went to get up again, I realized that, oops, that leg is in serious trouble. And I literally had to hobble for the next mile to find a residence and ask for help. And again, the hospitality kicked in and people were so helpful and got me back to Tipperary. And I arrived back in with George and Dorothy at Airbnb and explained what had happened. They said, "Oh, don't worry. I mean, stay here another night and rest up." And we hoped that the following day I would have been able to get off again. But as it turned out, I ended up staying in Tipperary for a week. My leg didn't heal. I got wonderful help from a pharmacist there in the town, and then a physiotherapist gave me treatment. And he delivered the bad news when he examined my leg, and he says, "Look, you're going to have to stop for at least 4 weeks to let this heal." So I was determined not to return to that stage. And I say I hung around Tipperary for a week, hoping it would improve, but it didn't. And I eventually had to return north for another 3 to 4 weeks, recuperate, and then back to Tipperary town to start off again. So my plan to stay there just 1 or 2 nights ended up for a week or more. George and Dorothy, who ran this little B&B, were just absolutely wonderful. They didn't charge me a penny for that stay. They fed me, they looked after me. They were absolutely wonderful. I still have very, very fond memories of Tipperary town. I've been back to visit them. I've been back to visit a lot of other people, actually, that I met during the walk, because they were just so kind. And when I'd written the book, I actually I drove back down through the route and delivered copies of the books to various people as a little thank you. So it was delightful to do that as well. Oh, I mean, there's another couple. I have to tell you this one, Rick, because there's a beautiful little place that you'll pass through in Cork called Guggain Barra. It's the Rock of Barra, it translates as, and it's a beautiful little oasis in the middle of the Cork Mountains. Beautiful lake, surrounding mountains, and there's a Guggain Barra hotel there run by Neil and Kitty. Again, they were wonderfully hospitable. I arrived in there to find that I was hoping to get a room there. I hadn't pre-booked a lot of stuff on this, by the way. I was just winging it, and it worked out extremely well for the most part. On this occasion, I did carry a tent with me as well for emergencies, but I had to use about 3 or 4 times. On this occasion, when I arrived in the Guggain Barra, they had no rooms available. They weren't able to put me up. So I used a neighbouring, one of their fields basically, to camp for the night. But they allowed me into the hotel to use all the facilities and have meals, and they treated me like a lord. I ended up staying there another night, and they got me a room for that night. Became very good friends with them. They're so hospitable. They drove me to starting points, etc., and picked me up in the evening. In terms of where I am at the moment, actually, in my personal life, I've actually met a lovely lady, and we are getting married in August, and we're going on a tour around Ireland for our honeymoon, and one of our stopping off points is at that hotel in Guggain Barra. So Neil and Kit are going to put us up again in that hotel. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them again. They've become wonderful friends. So I just throw that in as an example of just how life throws you these curveballs. Some of them are you don't want, some of them are just wonderful, and you just welcome them and embrace them with open arms.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
So then I like to think I come up with pretty good questions to ask people, but I often know that sometimes there's that thing that you don't know to ask. There's that experience that somebody had that if you don't just leave it up to them, like, is there anything else that you want to say about this journey that you took? Anything about the Ireland way that you found particularly significant?
Well, I'd already mentioned hospitality, and I think that is the overriding feature of this walk. It is challenging. There is long distances between starting and stopping points. You can obviously choose those to a certain degree, but there are occasions where there's just nothing between one town, one village, and the next on the route. So you have long distances to cope with there. It's not like the Camino where you have an incredible infrastructure of albergues, hostels where you can easily get accommodation for the night very cheaply. On Ireland Way, you'll mainly be relying on B&Bs, guest houses. There are occasional hostels along the way which you can utilise, but by and large, it's more the sort of the guest houses. Just coming back to something you said earlier, Rick, about just it takes you into the areas of Ireland that people don't normally see or visit as tourists. A lot of people might be familiar with the Wild Atlantic Way, which follows the coast along the south up the west, and it's a beautiful route to drive. And it has wonderful beaches and, and seascapes and all the rest of it. I drove it 2 years ago, and I know that for a fact. It's absolutely beautiful. This walking route takes you up through the middle of Ireland. A large part of it would be called the hidden heartland of Ireland, and there are many gems to be found along that way, some of which we've already touched upon. You're sort of exploring and encountering places that you wouldn't normally encounter, but nonetheless beautiful for that. There's a lot to offer. We talked earlier about the preference of the way to do it. Certainly south to north was the way I wanted to do it because I wanted to finish in Ballycastle. When you get to the north coast of Ireland, it is absolutely stunning. For a large part, it's the Causeway Coast along the north coast of Ireland, and you're going through places like Castle Rock and Portstewart, Portrush. You pass Dunluce Castle. You go through the Giant's Causeway, which is a World Heritage Site. Very interesting rock features there. You have the sea to your left practically the whole time you're walking that. And that's a 3 to 4 day walk going along that stretch. And it is absolutely stunning, particularly if you get the good weather. But even in wild weather, it can be equally dramatic. You just have to watch you don't get blown off the cliffs. There was another neat little. I've mentioned about coincidences as well, and there was coincidence with the O'Sullivan Bear story, that Irish chieftain. But there was also another neat little thing that sort of sold this trip to me, and that was there's an Irish fairy tale or folk tale called The Children of Lure, and I've been very, very familiar with it because my late wife, was from Ballycastle. Part of the folk tale relates to Ballycastle, and it's all about these children of a king, where there was a stepmother who got very jealous of the king's relationship with the children, and she turned them into swans basically and banished them for 900 years. And they spent 300 years up off the Sea of Moyle off Ballycastle, and 300 years in the centre of Ireland, 300 years out in the west coast of Ireland. And then after that time, they changed back into humans. They came ashore, changed back into humans, but they were incredibly old and obviously didn't live very long. It's very sad. It's one of the Irish sorrows, it's called. It's a very sad folk story. But where they came ashore is reputed to be down in close to Castletownbere. And there's a small monument there marking the site where the swans were reputed to have come ashore, the children of Lure. And in Ballycastle, then there's an iconic sculpture on the seafront of 4 swans, sort of a metal sculpture of 4 swans. That's a beautiful location, and that's their dedication to the children of Lure. So again, you had this, the start and the finish, had this very strong link to this old Irish folktale that I was very, very familiar with. And the front cover of my book, actually, you'll see, and no doubt you will do it yourself. I look forward to seeing the photograph at some stage in the future. All pilgrims that walk, or trekkers that walk from the south to the north and finish in Ballycastle, that's the touchstone, that particular sculpture on the seafront of Ballycastle. That marks your end point. So there's been lots of photos of happy souls arriving at that destination over the years. So as I say, I look forward to seeing you posing beneath that statue at some stage as well. In fact, if you let me know when you're going to be there, I'll try and make sure I'm up there myself.
Well, that's very kind of you. I tell you what, this was such a fantastic conversation. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome, Rick. I was delighted to be asked, and it's been a joy talking to you.
This has been episode 74 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Please consider donating to Casa of Pinellas County, Florida in honor of my pilgrimage on the Ireland Way. CasaPinellas.org/walkwithrick/ CasaPinellas.org/walkwithrick/. Today is my birthday, as I mentioned, and this is the only thing I am asking for this year. My wife, my friends, my family, and anyone who listens to this podcast. The only thing I want in 2022 for my birthday is you to give what you can to victims of domestic violence. CasaPinellas.org/walkwithrick/ CasaPinellas.org/walkwithrick/. We'll be returning to our theme park conversations in episodes 75 and 76. Marissa from Chicago and Sarah Says will be on the show to compete against each other in Disney trivia. You won't want to miss these 2 episodes because they will be an absolute blast. The first part of that contest will take place next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.